Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. We have a current issues panel with us today, a regular feature here on the show, and we're going to be discussing a variety of issues, including provincial responses to calls for vaccine passports, how colleges and universities plan to reopen this fall, if they are at all, the head of the BC Civil Liberties Association's recent resignation over comments made surrounding the burning of churches, and how Ontario is, or at least was, attempting to weave in critical race theory in mathematics lessons to kids in schools this year. Well, returning today is Conservative commentator Hanna Salamon Vegh and David Clement, North American Affairs Manager for Consumer Choice Centre. Welcome to the both of you. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you.
Excellent.
Great.
David,
thank
you're
you
good?
For having us.
Excellent.
Yeah,
well, I'm glad to
you.
have you all on, and we're going to dive right in. So I think we should talk about first the Ontario colleges and universities situation. And really, this is an issue for across the country. But let's focus on Ontario colleges and universities and what their plan is to reopen. And it seems that there seems to be a hybrid kind of wait and see kind of approach, but some in class, some mixed learning, some in person, which is nice. What are your thoughts on this, Hanna? You're just a recent university student. What are your thoughts on this new hybrid model, if you will, of approaching returning to school?
So my university has said that they aim to have as much in person as possible. And kind of what I can see from what they've told us already, that the only thing that'll be different than last year or last school year is that we will not have to social distance anymore. Everything else will be fully in place. And there's kind of always the backdoor boogeyman, we might have to, lock down again. We might have to go back online completely again. So I'm hoping for the best. It's kind of hard to plan as a student. And I do feel like for myself and a lot of my friends at university, online school has not been the best, especially if you're in music or in science and things like that. You need to be in person for labs and performing and all that. So we do feel like our education has taken a hit. And I'm hoping as well that my university is not going to be mandating the vaccine. That's kind of starting now with Seneca, and we'll see how things play out. So there's still a lot of things in the air. I'm hoping that we'll be able to be in person and that universities will, on a grand scale, will not be mandating the vaccine nor to return back in person.
Well, I think unlike our American counterparts, I haven't seen universities or colleges in Canada say that you must be vaccinated to attend class. I have seen that in order to live at a residence, a first-year
dormitory. Other than Seneca College has made it mandatory for staff, and students all across the board. But they're the first.
But they're the first, whereas I think almost half of American colleges, universities have said this is mandatory, this has got to happen. But then there are other things like, what happens if there's a fourth wave? Will things lock down again? Is there even a point to attempting in-person learning if we may be on a cusp of a new variant? David, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the closer we can get to everyone in class, the better. I mean, a lot is lost when you're not in class. And not only is a lot lost, it is, although I'm not a university student anymore, I would have some serious problems paying full tuition for entirely virtual learning, especially now with vaccination rates as they are, continuously ticking upwards. The whole point was to get life back to normal, and I think students being back in class is a huge part of it. So, I mean, I don't fault them for wanting to prepare for a worst case scenario, but I think everything should be done to try and avoid that at all costs.
Well, there's been even some discussion that perhaps rapid testing ought to be made available on campus. So if for those who, may be scared to return because of some new variant or say a spike in cases, that this might calm fears if people just were rapid tested. Hanna, what are your thoughts on that? Is that a violation? Is that a good path?
Well, I mean, it doesn't make sense with the type of vaccination rates that we have here in Canada and in Ontario as well. And if vaccines work, then we shouldn't have to worry about such things anymore. And the rapid testing doesn't really make any sense, because if you're vaccinated, you should not be able to get or transfer COVID. There's still kind of things up in the air about that. We have mixed messaging along those lines, but COVID, generally speaking, does not pose much of a threat to university-aged students. And here in Canada, across the board, since COVID became a thing last year and since we've known about it, only 79 people aged 29 and under here in Canada have died from COVID. And obviously those people's lives incredibly matter. And it's very sad that we lost lost 79 people, 29 and under. But generally speaking, university students are at a greater risk of overdosing, committing suicide, being struck by lightning, dying in a car accident or something like that, and not COVID. So we need to be living in reality about the risk or lack thereof that COVID represents to people my age.
Okay, we're going to pick up this discussion right when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back. We're discussing current issues with Hanna Salamon Vegh and David Clement. David, just before we went to commercial, I posed the question whether rapid testing was a path forward. I've seen in some American private schools, for example, they would rapid test students prior to entry. Is this something that you think should or could work in Canadian colleges and university campuses?
Yeah, I think it should. I think it could. And I think it's a shame we haven't gotten there quicker. I mean, there's a debate to be had over whether or not you mandate the vaccine for students. I understand the arguments against it, but at the same time, if we went to public school in Ontario, which many of us did, we were all required to get a long list of vaccines in order to attend and continue to attend. But I think that the rapid test presents a happy medium where you can allow for people to object for the right or the wrong reasons to the vaccine, and then just simply do the rapid test to demonstrate that they're they don't have the virus and they're not going to transmit it. And so I think it's a happy medium that could allow for in-person attendance for university and college classes.
But do you think this is overkill? Overkill, I mean, Hanna, we presented a very interesting statistic there of how many Canadians, but within that age cohort, have passed away due to COVID. It's relatively low. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is overkill to implement rapid testing? You know, we hear about secondary pandemics on mental health that, you know, many young people are suffering from that, and yet here we're throwing kind of all our resources into potentially rapid testing.
No, I don't think that it's an overstep at all. I mean, it's just a simple safety measure. Yes, the statistics show that young people are not likely at all to die from the virus, but that doesn't mean, I think that may be the wrong statistic. You really have to look at hospitalizations and severe illness. Now, the vaccine virtually eliminates that. And so that's an important box to check. And then rapid testing allows for you to cover the gap. And just remember that there are costs associated with an outbreak. Every time there's an outbreak, classrooms have to shut down, people have to go remote. And so this is just a very easy way of ensuring that we don't have to have that scenario where people are back at home or in their dorms learning virtually for a whole semester.
Okay, well, speaking about lockdowns, and I think this discussion about rapid testing and I guess you could say vaccine passport, if you will, lends to our next topic that I want to talk about, which is Alberta and Ontario recently have announced that they will not be implementing vaccine passports. So to be very clear here, I like to really listen carefully to what politicians are saying. We've seen some American jurisdictions like Florida, and I think Texas as well, have stated there's a ban on vaccine passports. That's not what was announced here. There was saying the government will not be implementing. So there is a distinction to be made. But if you were to ask me 6 months ago whether we would be having this discussion on vaccine passports for small businesses, restaurants, things like this, I would say no. I figured it would be something about rapid testing, whether restaurants would rapid test prior to entry. Hanna, we've heard these announcements. There are other jurisdictions like Quebec who are going to be pursuing vaccine passports as early as September. Is this an infringement? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, this type of stuff never ends. And so I always say you give the government an inch, they're going to take a mile, and they're going to keep doing that. And we have to understand that public health and safety is not more important than human rights. And we're sacrificing the rights of the individual because of the focus on collective health and safety. And we're seeing now, yes, Doug Ford is saying that vaccines, well, they're not going to be implementing vaccine passports here in Ontario. However, that does not prevent certain businesses and certain universities and colleges saying that they're going to make it mandatory. And some of the places where it's been made mandatory, they're only allowing for health are medical exemptions. They're not allowing for religious ones as well. And it is extremely hard to get a medical exemption, even for people who are medically exempt. And we're seeing certain cases of that in the US, where people who have terrible allergies to vaccines, who cannot take the vaccine, their university is saying, absolutely not, we're not going to accept any sort of medical exemption. So it's putting people in very difficult positions. And it just goes down to the simple point that these types of things are charter violations. And if vaccines actually work, vaccinated people have no need to worry about non-vaccinated people. So it's not making sense.
So in the 30 seconds we have before commercial break, to David's point, well, then why not rapid testing for those who are not vaccinated? What are your thoughts? Hannah.
Oh, so rapid testing, but I mean, I don't if we or anyone who doesn't take the vaccine or is not able to, they should not worry about being able to spread it to anybody who is vaccinated. And it's very small numbers of people who have not received the vaccine here in Canada. And we've never tested people for other sort of illnesses like that. And now it's going to be COVID, and I don't know for how long. And then what other illnesses are we going to say that we have to test people for? It's just not a good path to go down.
Okay, we're going to continue this discussion on provincial vaccine passports in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're here with our current issues panel, Hanna Salamon Vegh, David Clement. Thank you for joining me. It seems it's normal for us to have COVID kind of dominate half our topics. How can it not? This is kind of what's in front of us every day. We're talking about provinces who are or are not going to be introducing vaccine passports. Quebec has suggested it will by September 1st. They hope to be up and running by then. Ontario and Alberta just recently said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to introduce vaccine passports. That doesn't mean, however, that they're banned. It doesn't mean that the businesses won't themselves introduce a vaccine passport. It's a very controversial topic. David, what are your thoughts on what Alberta and Ontario have said, and do you think that it actually has any effect?
Yeah, so it's probably a good idea that the province didn't lead this, but I have no issue with businesses setting their own terms. I think it's entirely important, and it goes back to costs, right? We look at, pick a hair salon where there's an outbreak. They shut down for 3-4 days. They incur a ton of extra costs because of an outbreak. Maybe staff have to isolate depending on what the rules are. They have staff shortages. And so I don't see any issue with a particular business saying, hey, we're going to require a proof of vaccination and or a negative PCR test, which is what airlines have done in order to be here, and let consumers sort that out for themselves. I mean, different businesses have different needs. If you're in a hair salon or somewhere where you're maybe a little more close contact with others or with people who are working, there may be justification for it. And luckily, we live in a society where I'm sure there will be businesses that don't. And so if that's something that's a priority to you, you're free to take your business elsewhere and protest with your wallet. And so right. I don't think we should go the route of Florida and prevent businesses from setting their own terms. But I do generally think it's best to not have the province mandate this and let businesses sort that out based on their individual needs.
Well, interesting you mentioned this, that because you talk about businesses setting their own terms, and if there's any complaint I've heard over the past several months is businesses complaining that they haven't been able to open, that they haven't been able to set their own terms. So it's a kind of a very interesting balance we have here, and I appreciate what businesses are going through. There are some businesses, and I believe Good Life Fitness is one of them, who's actually suggested that they are in fact going to not allow vaccinated patrons into their places of business. And I don't know if this is firm, but I know there was discussion about this. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before. So on the flip side of vaccine passport mandatory to vaccinated, please don't come in. What are your thoughts on that, David?
I don't think that is accurate. And I don't mean to push on that, but I don't think that I think Good Life was caught saying they were considering a mandate, and then they backtracked on it based on public pressure. I wouldn't particularly like that policy. It wouldn't make any sense in terms of transmission of COVID, but it would fall into the same category of their terms, just like a business sets their dress code. If you go to a fine dining restaurant, you show up in jean shorts, they're going to tell you have to go home and change or you're not welcome. I mean, generally speaking, we should allow for businesses to sort that out. And so I think it's ultimately up to them.
Now, that's a good point. And Hanna, do you echo that it's ultimately up to the businesses, whether they allow this patron or not? I'm always worried about the human rights code here. At what point are we actually discriminating to the point where we're violating human rights? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so definitely private businesses should be able to decide many things of how they want to operate their business and that type of thing. It's incredibly important. At the same time, there's certain things they can't do, and they can't discriminate against people based upon certain things, including disabilities or medical issues or things like that. And also, if we don't have a provincial vaccine passport, I don't understand how, you're going to go to the hair salon or whatever, and they're going to ask for your physical vaccination card. Unless we're going to have a digital app or something like that, they can't ask for your, proof of immunization or something like that. It will have to be in a streamlined fashion. It's going to be incredibly cumbersome. And also, we've never had any outbreaks out of hair salons or private businesses or restaurants or stuff like that. It's always been in schools and long-term care homes and places like that.
I'm confused. Why wouldn't you be able to ask for the receipt of vaccination? I have mine. It can fold into my wallet.
I don't believe businesses are able to ask for that. I believe that's a violation of the Medical Privacy Act.
That's a good point. So if the government is not mandating vaccine passports, then does the business have a right to ask for it? Go ahead.
It's just as much of a violation as the requirement to have your child vaccinated for measles, mumps, and rubella. We've heard kind of the slippery slope of what's next, but that runs the other way. Would we, is that a human rights violation?
Welcome back. This is our last segment with the current events panel here, current issues panel. Hanna Salamon Vegh, David Clement, thank you again for joining me. So there's been a lot of drama and necessarily surrounding issues with residential schools. Some are suggesting that this recent spate of churches that have been burned have been in almost a reaction to that. Yes or no, I don't know. Those investigations are still going down. However, the now former head of the BC Civil Liberties Group, Harsha Walia, tweeted a very inflammatory tweet, or at least it was perceived to be inflammatory, where she responded to one of these reports of a church burned down as "burn it all down." And the Twitter sphere and social media and the news, for that matter, exploded with shock and, hey, what's going on here? Is that justified? Is that the right reaction? So maybe I'll start with you, David. She's now had to resign as the head of BC Civil Liberties Group. What are your thoughts on that, what she said, and is there a place for that?
Yeah, so I think what she said is very close to the line of the incitement of violence. It's pretty close. And so, I don't have any objection to her being let go or resigned, depending on who you're talking to online. But I think the real kicker here is that she didn't attempt to walk it back, right? She obviously tweeted this terrible thing in response to these criminal acts, which aren't justified, and they're certainly not justified in the eyes of the Indigenous communities whom we're having a national conversation about, because almost all of them have condemned these church burnings and said, stop, we go to these churches. So she didn't try and walk it back. She tried to explain it away or say she was taken out of context. So I don't particularly feel bad that she's no longer employed there. This certainly just feels like the consequence of doing something stupid and then digging your heels in and not admitting that it was something stupid.
Hanna, do you agree with David and his assessment of the situation?
Well, yeah, it was very sad to see someone ahead of a Civil Liberties Association saying something like that. Freedom of speech and expression is incredibly, incredibly important. And I'm one of the last people who would ever say that people's speech should be restricted in any way. But there is language of incitement to violence there. So even with Gerald Butts, what he also said, in one of his tweets that basically he felt that it was understandable that the churches were being burnt and stuff like that. His tweet, you could take it another way, but hers is quite clear, burn it all down. It's kind of easy for some people to say that about Christian churches right now. It's kind of cool to hate on Christians and Christian churches and stuff like that. So I'm glad that there is a backlash about this because especially if you're head of a Civil Liberties Association, you should be respectful of all people's faiths and beliefs and not condone violence because of past wrongdoings.
Yeah. So for me, I when I saw that tweet, I was shocked that it was tweeted out. But at the same token, I do respect one's right to freedom of speech. And she does represent a free speech organization, or one that seeks to defend that sort of thing. So I appreciate that she's operating within that sphere. Granted, I think, you spoke, both of you, very well, that it comes down to, is this the incitement of violence? Because I think there's a fine line. You can't yell, bomb in a crowded theater. That's wrong. There's no free speech there. So where is that line being crossed? You said she came close. Hanna, David, you said she came close to that line. Hanna, I think you said that she crossed that line. I don't know. For me... Go ahead, David.
I think the kicker, the important distinction is it's freedom of speech and association. So it's not the ability to say whatever you want and your employer not go, hey, we don't want to be associated with you anymore. That's really just a consequence. And this doesn't fall into those kind of cartoonish examples of someone being fired from a position because they tweeted a bad joke when they were 16. We're talking about a pressing issue of the day where people are committing acts of crime, and she condoned those. I mean, if I'm an employer, I certainly wouldn't want that person representing my brand. That wouldn't be on brand, I think, with any organization. And so the association part is important there for those who have said, well, they're violating her free speech rights. I don't think that that's happening, and neither of you two have echoed that claim, but there are some who seem to think that this is cancel culture, but I don't think it even falls closely into the category of cancel culture.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're out of time. We had other topics we need to get to, but we'll have to punt that for the next time we have you on. So thank you very much. It's been a good episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of freedom discussion today, whether you have the freedom to attend class, should you be tested, should you be vaccinated, should we have a vaccine passport, and should you be able to tweet whatever you like without consequence? Well, it's been an interesting show, and for Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.